Good morning, and welcome to our celebration of life for James Downey, the University of Waterloo's fourth President and Vice-Chancellor. I'm Lois Claxton, and I'm pleased to serve as MC. As we begin today's event, it is important to reflect and acknowledge the University of Waterloo's campuses in Waterloo, Kitchener, and Cambridge are situated on the Haldimand Tract, land 6 miles on each side of the Grand River, granted to the Haudenosaunee of 6 nations. The land inside and surrounding the Haldimand Tract, including our Stratford campus, is the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee. I also acknowledge and recognize this area is now home to many diverse First Nation, Inuit, and Métis groups. And now I would like to extend welcomes. First, a warm welcome to our in-person audience here in Engineering 7, as well as to those tuning in virtually across our campus and in the community. I'd like to acknowledge our 7th President and Vice-Chancellor, Vivek Goel, who will speak later in the program, and unfortunately our 6th President and Vice-Chancellor, now President Emeritus James Downey, who had planned to attend, isn't able but is joining us virtually. Vivek is joined by members of our senior administration, including our provost, several deans and vice presidents, other colleagues, both former and current. Catherine Fife, member of Provincial Parliament Waterloo, was also hoping to join, as was Barry Verbanovich, Mayor of the City of Kitchener, but unfortunately they're unable. And of course, we're thrilled that members of Jim's family are joining in person. Jim's wife, Laura, daughter, Sarah, her partner, Manfred, and their children, Elise and Joshua, son, Jeffrey, his partner, Tanya O'Callaghan, and daughters, Augusta and Hannah. And we extend a special greeting to many family members and friends who are watching online today. Later in the program, we will hear from members of the family, a program they were fully engaged in crafting and whose participation and input was invaluable. And now, as you might expect, a few words of my own. Prior to my retirement, I served as Secretary of the University for a couple of decades, a span which included Jim's tenure as President and Jim Kalbfleisch's tenure as his Vice President, Academic and Provost. Affectionately known as the two Jims, for 6 years they were an incomparable, inseparable team and the steady hands on Waterloo's tiller. But we're here today for a celebration. And over the next hour, we will hear myriad reasons why this is a celebration. A celebration of life well and fully lived. A life which left as a legacy a constellation of achievements, both nationally and internationally. A life committed to advancement of learning. We will also hear what it was like to work with Jim. And I can't make that statement without smiling, because working with Jim was inevitably fun, often challenging because expectations were high, but always fun, and perhaps for a reason. Jim once said that one of his roles, as he saw it, was to make it easier for others to do their jobs. Jim couldn't have foreseen how important that role would become during his 6-year tenure as president. While Wordsworthy and daffodils may have greeted his spring arrival at Waterloo in 1993, fiscal storm clouds were gathering, and then they gave forth. In October 1995, the provincial government announced a 15% cut in government grants to universities, a slash that followed years of smaller incremental cuts. Universities scrambled to find ways to deal with this monetary shock. At Waterloo, a special early retirement plan known as SERP was developed to offer early retirement to anyone who achieved age 55 and had 10 years of service. Within the space of a few months, more than 10% of full-time faculty and staff had accepted the offer and had left the institution. The plan was admittedly a blunt instrument, and the personnel losses were not evenly distributed across campus. But it was a plan that was fair and equitable to both faculty and staff as people, and avoided potential disharmony inherent in other models. The overarching reality of Jim's tenure was restraint, of course, and his efforts in the circumstance were to mobilize both people and resources to take best advantage of the changes in fortune. And he did in major ways, starting with CERP. And then there was fundraising. Notwithstanding the economic climate, Jim saw Campaign Waterloo come to a successful conclusion, exceeding its target, infusing funds into various university initiatives, and what was exceedingly important, providing strong evidence of the widespread regard for UW that such support indicates. There was the North Campus. A vision to develop the North Campus into an RT park was developed in the 1980s, and a prime parcel of 100 acres was sold to Hewlett-Packard with the expectation they would become the catalyst for development. When it became apparent that this was unlikely to proceed, the challenge was to reacquire the property. And Jim did just that. Successfully negotiated the return of the acreage, restored the integrity of the 700-acre North Campus, and eased the way for the development of what is now the David Johnston Research and Technology Park, one of Canada's largest. And he knew how to mobilize people in ways that spoke to them directly as individuals. He once said that he had a particular interest in what he called the pastoral care side of the presidency, to know what is going on in the lives of individuals, in the university community, and to do what he could to help. How did this manifest itself? The examples are many. His respectful focus on whoever was talking to him, his thoughtful and meaningful consultations, his beautifully scribed notes of appreciation, his stories to amuse and language to inspire, his celebration of achievements, his embrace of competitive fun, whether tennis or stone skipping, and perhaps most important of all, his willingness to remain a human being in an environment that could easily turn people into bureaucrats. Let me conclude to where I started. Jim once said he liked academe because it was inside work with no heavy lifting. But he lifted spirits, rallied the university community, and set a course for us to get on with better things. Inside work, for sure, but perhaps the heaviest lifting of all, making it easier for others to do their jobs. All right, now with that, I'm going to introduce a video with more words. Reminiscing inevitably follows the passing of someone we hold in high regard. And since Jim's passing, we have done just that, reminisce. We've looked through photos in Jim's many folios in the university's archives, reminding ourselves of his contributions to Waterloo, reminding ourselves of his first principle, do no harm, and his second, leave it better than you found it. In tribute, we have put together this video highlighting Jim's time and the distinct imprimatur he put on the University of Waterloo. Let's take a look.
Born in Newfoundland in 1939, James Downey had distinguished careers at Carleton University and the University of New Brunswick before being chosen to succeed Doug Wright as the University of Waterloo's fourth President and Vice-Chancellor in 1993. An English professor, Downey was a consummate writer, orator, and storyteller, and he was recognized as an expert in higher education policy and pedagogy, having served as president of the Canadian Bureau for International Education, chair of the Association of Atlantic Universities, and chair of the Corporate Higher Education Forum. And the University of Waterloo would soon need his expertise. The early 1990s were a time of dramatic changes for the post-secondary sector. An economic recession forced the hands of provincial governments across the country, and universities were not immune from budget and funding shortfalls, wage freezes, and unpaid time off. James Downey took the helm at Waterloo as it was grappling with dramatic cuts to the public sector by the NDP government of Bob Rae. The era of the social contract and the Ray days was followed by years of austerity by the Mike Harris Conservatives. James Downey believed in the importance of maintaining the integrity of all parts of the university in the face of these funding cuts and tuition increases. Where other institutions were badly divided as difficult decisions threatened academic programs and employees faced the prospect of sector-wide layoffs, James Downey fought to maintain a sense of community at Waterloo. More importantly, Downey worked hard to preserve Waterloo's character as a comprehensive university with 6 strong faculties. He did it by consulting widely, networking, and building relationships across the university, and working closely with Provost Jim Kalbfleisch. Together, they kept the university on an even keel through difficult days of salary rollbacks, enrollment expansion, tuition increases, and changes in the terms of employment for faculty members. In 1996, more than 338 longtime staff and faculty took a special early retirement package in order to save the university more than $170 million in salary costs. Many of those retirees were among the first cohort of faculty and staff who had brought verve and vitality to the university in its early days. Recognizing their contributions to Waterloo's success, President Downey hosted a campus-wide celebration in the retirees' honor. As Waterloo rebounded, Downey's strategy to retain the strength of all 6 of its faculties resulted in renewed growth across the university. This spirit of innovation and renewal became a driving force in the new faculty and staff hires of the late 1990s. Where other universities floundered, Waterloo thrived. In 1997, Downey also presided over the University of Waterloo's 40th anniversary celebrations and the successful Campaign Waterloo fundraising initiative that raised more than $86 million for the institution. Downey led the university for 6 years, from April 1993 to May 1999. During his presidency, Downey served terms as chair of the Council of Ontario Universities and chair of the Association of Commonwealth Universities. After serving as president, Downey returned to the classroom as a professor of English at Waterloo. Almost immediately, he took on a number of administrative posts. His decision to review and renew Waterloo's role in cooperative education was critical to the university's continued success. In 2004, Downey was the founding director of the Waterloo Centre for the Advancement of Cooperative Education, or WATCASE, which helped to further develop cooperative education as a defining characteristic of Waterloo. WATCASE, now known as the Work-Learn Institute, strengthened our institution's position as a progressive leader in experiential education in the post-secondary sector and has influenced the research and study of work-integrated learning. Downey retired from the university in April 2005. Jim Downey also worked as an education consultant for the Government of Ontario, advising several Canadian and international universities on issues of governance and management. He led an annual seminar for new university presidents and contributed essays to professional journals, and was the founding president of the Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario in 2007. Downey became an officer of the Order of Canada in 1996. In 2000, the Association of Commonwealth Universities awarded him the Simons Medal for outstanding service to higher education in the Commonwealth. In 2003, he received the David C. Smith Award from the Council of Ontario Universities for his contributions to universities and public policy in Canada. He held honorary degrees from 6 universities in Canada and 2 in the United States. James Downey strengthened Waterloo's reputation as a truly comprehensive university and positioned it for future success. He will be remembered for leading Waterloo with a sense of civility and commitment through challenging times, and for helping to reimagine cooperative education for the 21st century, ensuring Waterloo's success as a leader in experiential education. And in the true spirit of Waterloo, James Downey left something better behind.
A fine legacy indeed. When Jim Downey passed away last March, education lost a champion. His 1996 Order of Canada citation put it this way: he has had a notable influence on all levels of education in Ontario and New Brunswick as an administrator, whose thoughtful discourse on educational reform will carry into the next century. His reputation as an outstanding educator has been confirmed by his colleagues, both at home and abroad. These are accolades which you will hear reflected from various speakers, both here in person and on video. And the first speaker I'd like to call on is Bob Curtin, former Dean of the Faculty of Arts.
Thanks, Lois, and hello to everyone. James Downey was an exceedingly rare combination of wit and wisdom. He was an absolute master of phrase. He was a team leader, much love for that, and a dear friend. The first thing I want to point out has to do with laughter. Jim Downey, like Laura, is proud of his children and grandchildren, but this commitment to family included his parents, who he didn't know too well because they died rather early. He researched it, and in the write-up, as a little booklet, he uses this sentence to describe his mother. I think it is telling. Quote, "Her first language was laughter." Now, this is after going through a depression in Newfoundland where you have almost nothing to eat for years. First language was laughter. Well, we can thank her for passing that on to Jim. Jim's influence on his family is strong, and further, I'd argue that there's a little bit of Jim in most people he met, especially in those who worked closely with him. He lives on. Early on one time, when his presidency, I chanced to meet Jim in a hallway in environmental studies. And I was surprised. I said to him, "Jim, do you know that in business schools, they have a technique that's called management by walking around?" He knew that, but he shot back with, "Bob, I'm looking for my office." But his knack for, or his talent for engaging with people was something that turned out to be very valuable. The story about lifting was actually connected to an experience Jim had when he went to a pub in England in the dock area. And he sat down at a table with a couple of fellows and asked them what they did for a living. And they were stevedores, and they asked him what he did. Jim explained research, he explained academic, and he had never understood a single word he said. And they had no idea that there could be such a job. And so in the end, one of them responded to Jim, to use the phrase, "Nice job, inside, and no heavy lifting." So Jim liked people, good ones, bad ones, some as strange as us. He positively enjoyed laughing at himself, and he was a frequent attendee at the Downey Tennis Fest. Well, on the menu for the meal that followed was Jim Downey, because he was roasted at everyone, and he completely enjoyed that. He made the time to visit people, not at the Tennis Fest necessarily, but at everywhere, and he listened to staff, students, academics, visitors, athletes, donors, everyone, policymakers. He sang in the sunshine. He sang with carolers at Christmas. And he sang with Puff the Magic Dragon at guitar strummers in a spirited singing group he joined and hosted with Laura on occasion. I did want to refer once to the Black Wednesday that's already been discussed, which was the darkest day of Jim's service as president, 29 November 1995, the largest budget cut ever. But my point is this, that Jim was particularly concerned because much of his life had been devoted to talking about quality of education, quality of learning opportunities. And that budget cut, the 15%, was precisely on the teaching learning budget of the university. So that subtraction bothered him because it could interfere with the ability for the university to offer an enhanced learning opportunity to students. So some of the things that have been mentioned, like fundraising and so on, was a response to that. And as noted, aided by friend Jim Koplish, the two Jims at the University of Waterloo used exceptional sensitivity and Jim's experience with listening to everyone to administer this painful cut that may have been Jim's finest hour at UW, despite the anguish that was connected to it. And I say that because at other universities, there was a lot of unpleasant hostility that was experienced that we didn't have here. Jim's success with talks is legendary. This resulted in him being blindsided on occasion to give talks that he didn't know was going to happen. Now, to raise money when he was a student at Memorial, he was a pastor at visiting outports in Newfoundland, so he could handle an invitation to give a grace very easily, bless the food and so on. And he had a novel set of blessings that he could offer. And in fact, quite often the spice in Jim's grace was more than the spice in the meal. Anyway, he could do that, but how could Jim Downey succeed with invitations when you had scientists with arcane specialties, or you had a group of visitors with deep experience in some policy, and still make an appropriate talk on that? And out of suspicion that he was ready to be blindsided at any turn in his life. And I put it this way to him. I explained that there was a vocal artist, Dolly Parton, who once said, "It costs a lot of money to look this tacky." And I said to Jim, "It must take a lot of preparation to look this spontaneous." And he didn't answer directly, but without a pause, he gave me a quote from Mark Twain, which was this, Mark Twain saying, "It usually takes me more than 3 weeks to prepare a good impromptu speech." What was the most satisfying achievement of Dr. Downey? Well, about a decade ago, I once asked Jim, I said, out of so many achievements in your life, what one achievement gives you the most personal satisfaction? And I didn't know if he'd name the work with universities around the world, or maybe being president of Tennis Canada. He paused and then he revealed 3. The first one he mentioned was the quality of the Waterloo Co-op program, which he's really devoted to. And that type of program is way more complex than most people think. It's much, much more difficult. Many challenges in that aren't evident to the outsider. And he had a focus on that throughout his whole career. And he gave advice to many other institutions on how to create work-study programs. So you might wonder about, well, why is he helping all these other institutions? He's helping the competition. And the answer was, he did it because he thought it made Canada stronger to have more institutions doing it well. So there is also a notion that these other universities might catch up to us. But I think that Jeff and Sarah can verify that Jim, behind that calm demeanor of listening and so on, he was a fiercely competitive fellow. And only in the right circumstances would he reveal it that he was. And there was being no catching up to Waterloo. The second thing that he mentioned was his role at the University of New Brunswick, keeping certain documents from leaving UNB. So they include some work with Lord Beaverbrook and Joseph Kennedy, who was trying to manage his sons into being presidents. But the content is also there for the convocation addresses of John F. Kennedy in 1957 and Robert F. Kennedy at UNB in 1967. And of the two, Jim thought that the RFK one was more valuable because it was the very first time that RFK brought forth his emphasis on environmentalism and so on. And Jim's wording of it was, with affluence comes effluence. But in any case, that whole set of documents is there. The third thing he said isn't going to be a surprise, but it did sort of surprise me at the moment. He told me how delighted he was to get an invitation from McGill to present the Stephen Leacock Lecture in 1992. And if you understand Jim as well as most of you do, you'd know why that would be something that really mattered to him. Recall his mother's first language, laughter. A call to get Jim to agree to it came from David Johnson, who was president of McGill. Now, David became a sunshine sketch in Jim's talk in the Leacock Lecture. Jim states that David has one characteristic that's necessary, but he has another characteristic which is contrary to what's required. Here's Jim's words. "It is generally accepted that all you need to be a successful university president these days is silver hair for a look of distinction and hemorrhoids for a look of concern." Still continuing with Jim. "David's perpetually cheerful demeanor suggests he may be only half qualified for the job that he does so well." Now, I want to point out the obvious, which is that Jim's lecture was an argument that Canada needs less grumpiness and more laughter. That was the theme of it, and he was pointing out he doesn't mean laughter at, he means laughter with. So that's Jim Downey. Now, the last part is about a rare bird, and Jim had a story some of you have heard that he told about rarity of the peregrine falcon. And it's a story that should be told about Jim because he deserves it. He was himself a rare bird. And my point is that he, with this rare combination of wit and wisdom, is a master of phrase, a much-loved leader, a humble team player, a thoroughly decent person, and a dear friend. Now, he made contributions to universities that you can recognize, but he also made contributions to what universities can achieve in Canada and beyond. Now, the Downey family and the broader community have lost a rare friend, father, grandfather, and it is an immense pleasure to celebrate the life of Jim Downey. He made a heartwarming contribution to improving the ratio of laughter to grumpiness. Allow me to say on your behalf, we are blessed to have known you, Jim Downey. Thank you.
Well, what to say after that, other than absolutely wonderful, in typical Bob Curtin fashion. And thank you for making us laugh, because Jim would have appreciated that. Now, two former colleagues who very much wanted to attend in person but regrettably are unable have sent video reflections. First, we'll hear from Claire Morris, who served as president of the then Association of Universities and Colleges of Canada, now known as Universities Canada. And following Claire's video, we'll hear from the Right Honourable David Johnston, Waterloo's fifth President and Vice-Chancellor, who subsequently served as Canada's 28th Governor-General. Let's take a look at these videos.
Laura, Sarah, Jeffrey, and the very special grandchildren that Jim was so proud of. President Goel, distinguished colleagues and friends. I'm sorry not to be with you today to remember the remarkable Jim Downey, but I know the tributes will be full of memorable quotations, laughter, and tears. We first met Jim and Laura in 1980 when Jim was appointed president of UNB in Fredericton, a city to which we had moved in 1970 when my husband joined UNB. The excitement level was high when President Downey arrived, but so too was the quiet apprehension about a transplant from Upper Canada filling this important position in the province. Fortunately, Jim was able to claim his Newfoundland heritage as a legitimate passport and quickly endeared himself to native New Brunswickers and those from away. Jim's 10 years at UNB were marked by significant developments on the campus and a newfound pride in the academic community for the role UNB plays in the province and beyond. His effective relationships with Premiers Hatfield and McKenna, as well as senior politicians and public servants in the provincial government, were instrumental in building strong links between the university and policymakers. In 1990, Premier McKenna appointed Jim as co-chair of the New Brunswick Commission on Excellence in Education, which produced two significant reports which guided educational reform at all levels in the province. Not only was his leadership recognized and applauded at the university, but his skill on the tennis court and the dance floor was unmatched. Jim's love of the English language distinguished his many speeches, and his love of limericks are said to have been a regular feature of meetings at the university. Jim's appointment to the University of Waterloo in 1993 was New Brunswick's loss, but a welcome resumption of his contribution to higher education in Ontario. As President and CEO of the Association of Universities and Colleges of Canada, I attended annual seminars led by Jim, which provided newly appointed presidents with valuable insights that only a former president could offer. In 2007, he became the inaugural president of the Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario, confirming his contribution to higher education in the province. Jim's achievements and recognition were a big part of the Downey family. He loved his family deeply. Laura, his beloved wife of 57 years, his children, Sarah and Jeffrey, and his 4 grandchildren, for whom he was truly a besotted grandfather, as he was fond of saying. At the risk of offending Jim by not recognizing his unique sense of humor, let me close by quoting vintage Jim from an interview with the St. John's Telegram in June of 2009. Asked the question, "Do you have any hidden talents?" He replied, "If I do, they're so well hidden, I haven't discovered them." Rest in peace, dear friend, and keep them laughing on high.
When I think of Jim Downey, I think of a person who was both a remarkable human being and a remarkable humanist. Remarkable human being in that whenever you were with Jim, he always lighted up the room, often with wisdom and often with humor, and simply helped the whole situation to function better. As a humanist, Jim was really quite unique. I think he brought to Canada the very best of the Newfoundland Labrador understanding of what communication really means and its authenticity. Jim was a master of the spoken word. How many times have I listened to Jim speak with great thoughts, the wisdom, and that irrepressible sense of humor. Jim could both entertain and enlighten at the same time, and did so through the spoken word. I don't know about all of you listening to this, but when I watch advertisements on television these days, I really become quite dismayed at the kind of low level of them. The great exception are the advertisements from Newfoundland and Labrador with respect to tourism. And I think they're spectacular because they're so authentic. They do demonstrate that there's something quite unique and very special about that Newfoundland culture. And I think Jim brought that to bear, whether it was imitating a Newfoundland accent or recording a story, some of them true, some of them with a little bit of embroidery, perhaps some of them with a great deal of embroidery. It reminded us of communication skills at their very greatest, and also reminded us, I think, of how well this country functions because of the diversity of its people and the wonderful gifts of the humanities that Jim especially brought to the fore. So Jim, we salute you and we celebrate you and we thank you for the contribution you've made, not simply to the University of Waterloo, but to the whole of Canada.
Our thanks to both Claire and David for those reflections. Clearly, Jim has played a meaningful role in their lives as well as in all our lives. As we crafted today's program with family, we wanted to find a way to acknowledge Jim's East Coast roots and love of music. And what would be more appropriate for a son of the rock than Eyes the By, as performed by 3 of our talented student musicians, Frank Wang, Robert Choi, and Shahyan Saeb Nouri. tree. I don't know about you, but my toe was tapping. And at one point I thought we really should be clapping, but that wasn't part of the program, so I didn't want to throw you off. But I think we all would have liked to. Anyway, thank you all very, very much. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our President and Vice-Chancellor, Vivek Goel, to share some reflections.
Well, thank you, Lois, and thank you to our students for that great musical performance. We're very humbled that the Downey family invited us to celebrate Jim's life and contributions to the University of Waterloo and to post-secondary education across Canada and around the world. Thank you, Lois, for hosting this special program and to everyone that's contributed to this tribute today. As you've heard, Jim Downey was an extraordinary leader with a great sense of integrity and humor. Under his leadership, Waterloo built its reputation as an innovator within the post-secondary sector. He led an important review and renewal of the cooperative education program that reinforced its integral role within our institution. Next year, the University of Waterloo is celebrating our 65th anniversary of co-op. Its ongoing success today is in large part attributable to Jim's role in bolstering the program during his tenure. While we mourn the loss of an extraordinary visionary, leader, and educator, we can also celebrate the lasting legacy of his contributions. On a personal note, I first got to know Jim and work with him in his role at the Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario, when he was working to build a new provincial agency focused on improving quality in our sector. A year later, I found myself in the position of starting a similar agency in the public health world. Jim shared freely his time and wisdom as I learned to navigate the complex governance arrangements of Crown agencies. And anyone here who thinks that university governance is strange and difficult, try checking out the world of Crown agencies. I recently had an opportunity to speak with former Supreme Court Justice Frank Iacobucci, who was the chair of the Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario when Jim started. Justice Iacobucci spoke of President Downey's remarkable talents and experience that made lasting contributions to post-secondary education. On a personal level, like so many others, he said he had a treasure chest of memories of an extraordinary friend and human being. As I think of the challenges that we face today, whether it's the pandemic, the climate crisis, changing geopolitical dynamics and armed conflicts throughout the world, and economic instability ahead, I'm reminded that President Downey faced very complex challenges in his time here. I'm inspired by his approach during those difficult times, and there's so much for us to learn from the way he led our institution through such times and left it a better place. Following in his footsteps and those of his predecessors, we're imagining a bold future that addresses humanity's most pressing challenges and will lead us into the future with the same confidence and foresight he exemplified. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you to the Downey family for allowing us to pay tribute to their father, President Downey. I would now like to invite Sarah and Elise Downey, Jim's daughter and granddaughter, to share some reflections on behalf of the family.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah. I'm Elise Downey. I'm not Sarah quite yet. That's a hard shoes to fill. My grandfather wore many hats, tennis hats, cowboy hats, but I'm one of the lucky 4 people to be able to call him my grandfather. My grandfather was known for his intelligence, charm, kindness, and ability to put words to emotions beautifully. According to Oxford Dictionary, there are more than 171,000 words in English, but neither one nor combination could describe the emotion Jim Downey made us all feel. His attentive listening, chosen words, and gaze made us all feel more than extraordinary. One day he told me, "You are so brilliant that you sparkle." This had stuck with me for many years. How could someone say something like that to me? I had just graduated elementary school, which is not a big feat. I was 11, and in retrospect, he never viewed individuals for what they were in front of him, but rather the possibility of what they could be. This vision of possibility enabled him to lead Waterloo, UNB, and his family with such grace, because he always knew that there was something bigger and better ahead of us. Now, I would also like to thank the University of Waterloo for giving him more than just a job, but for giving him a place to live and a place to be and a place to lead. This city and this university gave him a home, the longest home he had ever known for 30 years, a home that his 4 grandkids grew up in and swam in his pool and watched Dora the Explorer because he had the patience of a saint for me and my brother. But time is an unequal thing. And although I was able to know my grandfather for 15 years, 358 days, the past 284 have felt so much longer. But every day I look at my mom and see his gift of leadership. Oh, Mom. I watch my brother's love of sports, my uncle's adoration of literature, my cousin's passion for music, and I see my grandfather for just a minute. His love, his kindness, his charm, and his humor is once again with us all. So I thank every single one of you for being here and for listening, and most of all, for allowing his memory to live through us once again. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you all for coming to celebrate my incredible dad. My family appreciates the many ways you have supported us over the past months and as we adjust our lives without Jim Downey. Books could be written about my dad's accomplishments, on the lessons he shared, and on the adventures he's lived. But you'll be relieved to know that in these few minutes of reminiscence, I'll only talk about 3 of the most important lessons I learned from my father: the importance of family, the value of humility, and about leaving a legacy. On the importance of family, love, giving and receiving are the essence of life. Dad was fortunate to have had all of you and many others to get his fill of both throughout his 81 years. Nothing was more important to him than family and friends. This groundwork was laid by the strong and loving family in which he grew up. While both of his parents had died by the time he was 25, for the rest of his life, he spoke about his parents, Mimey and Ernest, with affection and admiration. We witnessed the affection he showed his 5 older sisters through regular phone calls and weekly "Dear Sis" letters. He nourished his Newfoundland roots through regular visits to his native province and his hometown of Winterton. The loving relationship he had with his closest and only remaining sister, Edwina, was legendary, right through to our final trip a year ago, so he could see her one last time. His family laid the foundation for the one he would create with our mother. We learned about the importance of marriage in the way he loved her. Their 57-year partnership included many adventures: living abroad, becoming parents and grandparents, traveling around the globe, and different jobs in different cities. In addition to the big moments of life, there was tenderness in life's daily routines. My favorite routine was seeing him call her every day from the far reaches of the earth to check in on her. Even when he was hospitalized this winter and could no longer dial the phone himself, he found a way to keep in constant contact with her through the help of the nurses in the hospital. He never missed a day. My parents built a happy life together, supported by incredible friends, and we should all aspire to having a loving and enduring relationship like theirs. Then the next generation of Downeys came to be. One of the many ways our dad showed Jeffrey and me the importance of family was through eating dinner together, even if he had to return to work straight afterwards. He loved a good meal, a fine glass of wine, and dinner table conversations that involved lots of stories, laughs, and a few dirty jokes. On special occasions, we'd have sing-songs after dinner, where he'd pick up his guitar and lead us all in song. Family meal traditions became even more important when we added spouses and children to the ever-cramped table. Dad did more than show interest in our activities as we grew up. He participated in them. He helped me survive my teenage years through tennis. We played countless hours together, sometimes across the court from each other and sometimes on the same team. And through our shared love of the game, we stayed connected, even at times when few words were said. Then, as my love of travel blossomed, he invited me to join him or agreed to be my companion on many fine trips. We adventured to Newfoundland, to France, Greece, England, Austria, New York City, Florida, California, Hong Kong, and in recent years, Club Med trips to the Caribbean with family and friends. Travel with my dad was always in style and resulted in returning with suitcases full of new clothing and the absolute disdain of my mother, who should have known better than to leave us unsupervised. We are fortunate that the next generation of Downeys had a chance to learn the importance of family and tradition as he assumed his next great role as grandfather. Augusta, Elise, Hannah, and Joshua were beguiled by their grandfather in the same way Jeffrey and I have always been. I'm thankful that our children got to know their grandpapa's special qualities through stories, many great swims in his pool, and his belief that each of them has incredible talents. While no family is perfect, ours is pretty damn close, and we have our dad to thank for being the glue, the patience, and the wisdom that keep us together. Jeffrey and I promised him that we would take care of our mom and of each other as we continue on without him. On the value of humility, Dad was so incredibly smart, kind, wise, funny, athletic, stylish, and handsome with that distinguished gray wavy hair, always impeccably combed. He was recognized around every city he lived in and far beyond. I remember getting on a tour bus in remote Greece and somebody on the bus saying, "Hey, Dr. Downey." He received countless awards, degrees, and prizes throughout his distinguished career, and he had every reason to be boastful and cocky. And yet, he never was. He was motivated by meaningful connections and important causes to people and important causes. When he spoke to people at gatherings, he'd look them in the eyes, making them feel that they were the most important person in the room, and people would often wait for that special moment with him. We know how important his connections were to many people through the countless calls, cards, emails, social media posts that have come to us recounting stories that almost invariably highlight his humility. Even at the height of his career, wearing Order of Canada pin, when people would ask him what he did for a living, in his own humble way, he'd say, "I'm just an English teacher." Perhaps the time that most demonstrated his degree of humility was when we were living in Ottawa in 1980, and I was 12 years old. A big thrill for Jeffrey and me was to be able to go to the airport with our mom to pick up our dad, who was returning from a business trip. On one occasion, When finding him at the luggage carousel, he told my mom that Joey Smallwood had been on his flight. He briefly introduced himself to Joey, who was, of course, a famous Newfoundland politician and a father of Confederation. Joey's government policies in the late 1950s had allowed young outport kids like him to get significant financial support to go to university, a path out of the fisheries to more academic jobs. My dad decided to do what any good Newfoundlander would do, and that was to offer Joey a lift to the Chateau Laurier Hotel. Joey welcomed the chance to have yet another audience. As we drove from the airport to the Chateau Laurier, I listened to their conversation with great curiosity from the backseat of the car. They covered important Newfoundland events, famous families, not so famous families, then came to the topic of Newfoundlanders who'd made it big on the mainland. After going through a list of at least 10 stars, Joey looks at my dad and says, "And I hear that a Newfoundlander has just been appointed president of UNB." In my dad's inimitable way, he shrugged his shoulders and said, "So you don't say." I, of course, always proud of my amazing dad, leaned over from the backseat to clarify, to Joey's absolute astonishment, that his driver was, in fact, the latest famous Newfoundlander. I'm building a legacy. As Jeffrey and I have started sorting through my dad's office and computer, we've been struck at the way he documented his world, interesting people, great stories, and his observations and insights. We have his commonplace books, letters, scholarly publications, speeches, audio recordings, slides, photos, and expansive book collection. And we are thankful to the University of Waterloo Archives for cataloging and safekeeping his most important works. We were, of course, aware that he was always working on something, but now that he's gone, the enormity of these works is of great comfort to us. We will continue to learn from our dad for as long as we live, as will the next and future generations of Downeys. How thankful we are to have the chance to keep getting to know him through these works. As you can imagine, I miss my dad so much. But he had a full and fulfilling life. He did it all. He reached a ripe old age. We left nothing unsaid. We each got the chance to tell him we loved him and hold his hands in the final weeks. We have a lot to be thankful for. And being his daughter will always be my greatest pride. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Elise, for your heartfelt remarks. You would have made a very proud father and grandfather even prouder. Thank you. And thank you to the entire Downey family for being here with us today. We hope that our tribute to Jim has been in keeping with your wishes, and especially we hope that it has done him justice. Jim's was a life richly lived. We are grateful for his sustaining legacy and the many domains he served to better during his career. And in closing, thank you to all who have joined us with this celebration for Jim. That concludes.